How do we help our patients make meaningful, sustainable lifestyle changes? Find out today from the author of The Habit Revolution. And this is part 1 of 2. Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. Welcome back to the podcast. We have a super special interview for you today. Someone from halfway around the globe, because if we went all the way around the globe, we'd be back where we started. So we have Dr. Gina Cleo. She has a PhD in habit change. She's an adjunct professor at Bond University and an accredited practicing dietitian, all things that we need to know so much about as physicians. Her habit change research has been published in multiple medical journals, and she's appeared for over 250 news outlets, including many of Australia's major television networks. She's a keynote speaker and expert panelist at national and international conferences, and she also runs courses through her Habit Change Institute and recently published a book, which is what we're going to be talking about today, called The Habit Revolution. So Dr. Gina Cleo, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Brad. Thanks for that lovely introduction too.
So let's start with just a little about you. What inspired you to get your PhD in habit change?
I've always been a curious soul. Like my mum's always said to me when I was younger, you're going to be a scientist, because I just asked all the why questions. And when I was working as a dietitian, I found that I could only help people short term, and it was bugging me. And I also really struggled with my own habit change. You know, I can change my own behavior short term, like I can exercise for a day or a week, but am I actually an active person? Not really at the time. So I was just learning more and more about the brain and why we do the things we do. And the more I researched, the more fascinated I became with neuroscience and habits. And then I was offered to do a PhD with a scholarship. And I was like, perfect timing. I just got back from overseas and I found myself studying full time for 4 years.
Amazing. Amazing. And what we were talking about before the show is I just think it's so important for physicians to know how to help our patients, either with short-term habits, right? Something simple like taking your medication, right? You need to do that for, if it's a round of antibiotics, fine, 10 days, but you got to help them because, how many people finish their course of antibiotics? I'm sure there's literature on it. I don't know it offhand. Or like our patients that have to take their medications daily. Like sometimes some of them are going to do it 100% of the time. But if we knew ways to help them to do this, and then, everything that's to do with lifestyle change, physical fitness, physical activity, dietary changes, like if we know what changes they need to make, but we don't know how to help them do it. I just think this stuff is so important.
Yeah. That's what inspired me really, is I realized we don't have a knowledge deficit. We know what we should do. We know what's healthy to eat and how much we should exercise. But why are we not doing it? And I realized we have got a behavior change issue rather than a knowledge issue.
Exactly. We know what to do. We just don't know how to do it. And we know what to teach our patients. We just don't know how to help them to make it part of their life, to make it habit. So I want to go through first 3 different scenarios that we see as physicians, right? We see patients either as a one-off, like you're an emergency medicine physician, you're urgent care. We might even be an anesthesiologist who's just seeing the patient, maybe not the best time to talk to them about habit change, but still, it might be like a one-off interaction. And then we have, someone that we might be seeing for chronic illness where you have multiple visits, but not that much time. And then we've got this coaching scenario, or you're in, direct primary care where you might have more involved, longer visits, and then you can really get into the weeds with the patient. So I want to just go through what you would recommend we teach to our patients in each different scenario. So let's just start with that first one, a singular visit. They want to know what they can do to change their habits. What kind of advice are you giving?
Oh, okay. Well, it really depends on the patient, what their goals are. So if you're just seeing them for a single visit, you probably want to make something so easy they feel inspired to go away and feel empowered to do. And we don't want to motivate people, because motivation comes and goes and it's short-lived. We want to inspire them to be intrinsically motivated to want to make this genuine change. So it would be something along the lines of, this is what you want to achieve. What's the first step that you can take to get there? And make it really practical. like attaching a trigger to it. When are you going to do it? What time of day? Or where will you be? How will you hold yourself accountable? Really creating a vivid, solid plan, I think, can be one of the most empowering things, because we're so good at just saying, hey, you should do this, but we're not so great at guiding someone and really holding their hand through what that process could look like for their life.
So make it small enough that it's easy to do and help them work it into their day. So like the trigger that reminds them that it's time to do something, and also like a part of their day and week that it's actually more likely to get done because there happens to be a little pocket of time,
Yeah.
or, whatever it is that's going to lower the bar to them being able to do it.
Exactly. And that works for both creating new habits and breaking their old ones. Like if you're speaking to someone, say, about quitting smoking, it's the same thing. Instead of talking about just reduction or cessation of smoking, it's talking about, well, how are you going to do that? Are you a cold turkey person? Do you want to start by just reducing by 1 cigarette a day? Okay, well, which one is that going to be throughout the day? And really, it almost holds them accountable if you get the person to really like hash out their plan. They're like, okay, I really have to do it now.
Okay. So that's how you get buy-in from them, right? Like if
Yeah.
they're structuring the plan themselves.
Yes, definitely. Because
Kind
then
of with the
they're
gut.
working it into their own life. It becomes a personal plan that is much more achievable than generic advice.
So I think we're already getting into like habit design. So we'll go back to those other scenarios later, but I think we're already kind of pushing in this direction. So I definitely want to explore it some more. So like, can we get into the weeds a little bit about how
Yeah.
you would help someone structure that? Like, what are the questions that you ask? Let's start with that.
So the questions that you'd ask essentially is you're trying to understand what might be the barriers for someone, say, to start exercising, start moving their body. Do they have the resources for it? Do they have the time, the flexibility, the motivation? And it's really trying to understand what their barriers are. For most people, their goals are too big, they've made too many goals, or they've just been really too ambitious, or they've seen what they want to do as something that's not achievable. One of the biggest predictors of success is self-efficacy. It's the belief that we can achieve the thing that we're trying to achieve. So making it so small, they feel like they can't say no to it. If somebody has this resistance to movement, ask them, what kind of movement do they enjoy? It could be hula hooping, it could be Zumba. It doesn't matter what it is. It's really about making them feel that what they're doing is okay and it's enough and it's a starting point. And then you can build from there, from that point on. So you can just say, let's just start with 1 day a week and make it so achievable, because that's what builds self-efficacy. When they do something, they achieve it and they're like, oh, actually, it wasn't that hard. It wasn't that bad. And then the following week, they might add another day and so on until they achieve their greater outcome.
So, BJ Fogg's book, Tiny Habits, and then you had James Clear book, Atomic Habits, right? The whole idea was that it's small, right? Is it possible to make it too small, right? Is it possible that they would then they don't get that self-efficacy? Like Dr. Fogg talks about like flossing one tooth, right? And
Yeah.
starting from there. So is it, I mean, he's incredible. He's actually been on the show, but I'm not trying to throw shade, but I'm trying to figure out, like, when we're giving this advice, like, is it possible to make
Mm.
it so small that they don't get that self-efficacy? They're like, well, of course I did it. That was too easy. And then they stop doing it.
Yeah, awesome question. And yes, it can be. So if you think of like a bell curve, and on one end, you've got too small, on the other end, it's too big. And the bell is the effort that our brain is going to invest in this thing. What happens when our goals are too small is our brain's like, it goes through a state called under arousal, where it's bored, it's going to procrastinate, there's no motivation, and your brain just doesn't exert the effort required to do the task. And it's the same thing that happens when the goals are too big, but we go into a state of over arousal. Now we're in a state of fight or flight. Our brain's like, I'm not going to put any effort into this because I'm pretty sure I'm not going to achieve it. It's like having a hit of tennis with Serena Williams. You know you're not going to win, so you might just want to get off the court before you've even started. And if it was too small, it would be like you up against, say, a 5-year-old who has never played tennis before. You're not going to give it your all to try to win this game. The sweet spot is the edge of comfort, is when the goal's not too big and it's not too small. It's just enough to challenge you, but you know that you can achieve it. That's going to look different for every single person, which is why habit change is such a personal journey. I've worked with one patient who their starting point was putting their shoes on, and that's all he felt that he had the capacity to do to start exercising. So for a whole week, he just worked on putting on his sneakers. And that eventually turned into applying for a 10K race, which is awesome, but it took time for him to get there. He couldn't have started at anything other than just putting his sneakers on.
Okay, so that sweet spot, and I would imagine it has to be something, which is what you were getting at earlier, actually, is that it has to be something you enjoy. So, I mean, we're using the example of physical activity just because it all seems to always go back to that, right? It always seems to always go back to food and physical activity. It doesn't, but those are just the penultimate examples. So what you were saying earlier was it has to be something that they enjoy. So if they
Yeah.
enjoy it, they're more likely to want to do it. And then you don't have to have as much motivation because the enjoyment is kind of the reward itself. But then the span of time or the difficulty needs to be enough that they feel like they've actually accomplished something and even push themselves a little, but not too much that it's too. So, and then, that's, I guess, that sweet spot you have to find for each person, which is why there's so much failure, right?
Yes.
Because people are trying to model themselves after other people
Yep.
who did something harder or did something easier, and they're not doing it they're not coming up with it themselves, and then they don't land in that sweet spot, and then they feel like a failure, and then they lose that self-efficacy, and then they end up in this.
That's exactly right. You have literally just described the cycle of failure. It's such a big thing when we're comparing ourselves to other people or trying to be influenced by other people who have a different starting point. We don't know their journey, we don't know their capacity. And also our starting point, that sweet spot for us is going to change throughout our own journey. I could have a week where I've got heaps of time, lots of capacity. No one is sick in the household. It feels good, and I can push. And other weeks, it's going to look different where I might be traveling and I don't have as much capacity to do something. It's dynamic and we need to work with that. And that's why having that sort of minimum viable step that we are happy with is important. And anything more than that is an awesome bonus.
There was the quote from the book that I absolutely loved, and it's, "What appears to be laziness is often exhaustion." And,
Yeah.
and I think that's such, that's what we have to think about with our patients, right?
Mhm.
Like if you think of your patients as lazy, you're not going to be motivated to then try and help them. But
Yes.
if you picture them as being exhausted, and I would add to that, hopeless,
Yeah.
because they might have tried a bunch of stuff and it didn't work because it wasn't right for them, right? It was some like cookie cutter recommendation that other doctors or magazines had given to them. So they're either exhausted or hopeless or both. And I think the onus is on us to try and get them out of that place.
Yeah. And we know this from research is the more tired we are, the more exhausted, the more time poor we are, the more we fall back into our unwanted habits. And it's because we just simply do not have the mental resources and the capacity to do something other than something that's just going to be self-indulgent and easy and dopaminergic. And, it's just going to feel good in the moment because that's what we're seeking. And we see it also in people, for example, that do night shifts or working where they're not sleeping at regular times. They make more errors, they get sick more, they have shorter lifespans. And we know this because the brain has a limited resource and we are not superhumans as much as we love to, think that we are. There are going to be limitations.
So you refer to that in the book as the ego, right?
Yeah, it's ego depletion. That's what it's called
Ego
in
depletion.
psychology.
I think a good place to start with our patients that are starting from zero, right? They don't even
Mm,
know where to begin, would be to manage their ego depletion first. So
yeah.
instead of focusing on exercise and diet, focus on the things that are going to that are going to stop their ego deplete. I mean, what's the opposite of ego depletion actually?
Well, I guess it's a sense of self-control, self-discipline.
Okay.
That's the
So,
opposite of
so
that. Mm.
So what are the things that we should work on with them so that they don't have that ego depletion so that they are then able to work on those other habits?
The biggest one and the most prevalent one is stress management. Stress reduces our sense of self-control like nothing else. And stress can be physical, emotional, mental. It could be not having enough sleep. It could be just too much stress at work. It could be being very time poor, for example. Those things are going to reduce our self-control resources so quickly. And if we can manage stress better in our patients, we give them a gift of having more capacity to create new habits. Also, when we're stressed, that cortisol, it's shrinking prefrontal cortex, logical part of our brain. It's actually enlarging our amygdala, the emotional fear center of our brain. And habits cannot be created in that environment. We need to have our logical centers working at full capacity in order to be able to make meaningful and sustainable changes. So stress management, number one thing.
Any recommendations for how to do that? I feel like that's that's not a podcast episode
Yeah.
unto itself. It's like a whole podcast
Yeah, I agree.
series unto itself. But I mean, any tips there?
It's so different for every person. A few years ago, I downloaded every single meditation app that was available on the market, and I was trying to do all this like guided meditation, and I sucked at it. I didn't enjoy it. I was just terrible at the whole experience. And I think it made me more stressed because I'm a perfectionist and I wasn't doing it as well as I thought. Then I remember going outside. I live on acreage, so I've got this beautiful garden, and I was playing around with my dog, and I noticed myself being present, being mindful, being calm. And I was like, this is my meditation. Being in nature and playing with my dog without any technology around, this is it for me. And it taught me such a lesson in that stress management looks completely different for every person. For someone, it could be baking. For someone else, it could be yoga. It's going to look different. And again, you need to just come home to yourself and notice what that looks like for you.
What if it's sitting with a bowl of ice cream watching Netflix?
Okay, well, we're talking about short-term rewards versus long-term gains here. It's going to make you feel better in the moment. There's no doubt. Ice cream has sugar in it, which gives you dopamine. Netflix will give you dopamine because of the screen and the colors and the visuals, but it's going to leave you with a side order of guilt and shame, and you're not going to sleep as well. You're not going to feel as good about yourself. And so long-term, it's a terrible idea. So we want to look for the things that are obviously going to help us in the longer term. Some really quick things are things like just 5 minutes of breath work, slowing down your breath, meditation, doing a stretch, enjoying a cup of tea and really being mindful about what that tastes like and the warmth in your mouth. It's just being present in the moment. And if you can do that for 5 minutes, it's game changing.
So rather than the ice cream and the Netflix, which are distractions from being in your head, things that put you in your head that you enjoy, that are that lead to more mindfulness, that lead you to be present in the moment.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, most of our stress is either anxiety, where we're thinking about the future and we're stressing about what will come or what won't come. And we have depression, which is the rumination on the past. When we're in the present moment, when we're still and we're here, that's where we feel the most safe, the most calm, the most okay.
So I guess a question for the patients would be like, what are some activities that you do where you're really truly present? And then we kind of build that more into their day, and that leads to less ego depletion. And then that puts them in a better position to be able to execute on whatever habits they have.
And give them a space to do that. Say, when you have a shower, every time you have a shower, just be present in your shower. Don't be thinking about what you're going to wear or what you're going to do that day. Notice the water running on your body. Notice all those little things. Be present in that moment. And that's the only time you need to do it that day. And then just that is going to help to rewire their brain into that state of stillness. And the more they practice it, the better they'll get at it. And then they'll notice the difference of, this actually feels really good. I feel calm when I do this. And it'll really help to just down-regulate their nervous systems.
And I guess the trigger there would be like turning the shower on.
Yeah.
Right?
When I have a shower.
Turn your shower on, turn your presence on.
Yes. Oh, I love that. That should be a t-shirt. or a neon sign that you have in your bathroom.
So the triggers are the things that tell you it's time to perform the habit.
Yeah.
And some of those you can design into your day, right?
Yeah.
But some of them just happen. You talk about emotional triggers,
Yeah.
right? Things that cause other, kind of a domino effect that is not necessarily your intention. So, and I think awareness of that is helpful if you're trying to change a habit. So, can you talk about emotional triggers?
Yeah, I mean, emotional triggers, the really common ones are emotional eating. So when I feel sad or lonely or bored, I will go for a snack. It could also be when I feel lonely, I'll scroll on social media. Or when I have any sort of idle moments, I will like check my socials. Those are our emotional triggers. And so often when we're trying to change or, break an unwanted habit, we focus so much on the habit that we want to change. We say, I'm not going to just eat when I'm not hungry anymore. Or I'm going to reduce my social media consumption. But we don't look at what triggered that habit in the first place. And that's really where we need to start. We need to take a step back and think, all right, I'm scrolling mindlessly right now. Where am I? What time of day is it? Who am I around? How am I feeling? What have I just done beforehand? And notice those triggers. And that's when you can preempt the next time it's going to happen and create a strategy to do something different. So you then might say, I anticipate that there are going to be times when I feel lonely, and that's okay. It's a normal human experience. But when I feel lonely, I'm going to do this, and then insert new healthier habit, have it around you so it's nice and easy and accessible. And that is how we make meaningful changes to our unwanted habits.
Yeah, my wife and I, we want to use our phones less around our kids. And I did an interview around when the COVID vaccine was coming out for motivational interviewing.
Oh, cool.
And
Yeah.
so because we're trying to use motivational interviewing to increase vaccine uptake. And so the psychiatrist turned it around on me and asked me what, was something I would like to do less. Same answer. Decrease my social media use, right? Same idea. Use the phone less in front of my kids. Those two things are intertwined. So that was when the vaccine was coming out, and I still haven't gotten anywhere
Yeah.
with that habit change. And so what you're telling me is I need to be mindful of when I end up taking the phone out of my pocket and scrolling in front of my kids so that I can stop that from happening. So if I notice the pattern when that phone comes out, because I still want it on me for those rare occasions I take pictures or whatever.
Yeah.
But like what's going to stop me from taking it out is noticing the trigger that causes it to happen. So once
Exactly.
I've noticed that trigger, what do I do next?
So you've noticed a trigger and then just be present with it. It's going to be something that will likely be slightly uncomfortable because you're escaping it. You're escaping what you're feeling in that moment or the job that you're procrastinating on or whatever it is that you're doing. You're avoiding that through mindless scrolling. Sit with the discomfort. It's not easy, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. And then you can just work through it and you're like, oh, it didn't actually take that long to move through that. It will take you no more than maybe 2 minutes to move through the discomfort of that. And then you'll notice that the urge to pick up your phone won't be there anymore.
I had attending in medical school who used to say, learning is painful. And I say that to my kids too, whenever they're getting super frustrated with something. I'm like, do you feel that? Do you feel that? That's learning. That's what learning feels like, that discomfort. And so what you're telling me is I need to do that myself. It's
Yeah,
really easy for me to tell someone else to do it, but I have to do it myself, which is
I
that
just did what the
that discomfort.
psychiatrist did, and I just turned it straight back onto you, Brad.
But that's great. So it'll take me a few times to sit with that discomfort, realize that, and then the habit it just stops. Like what?
Well, without triggers, we don't have habits. Without triggers, like the trigger is the first ingredient of a habit. If you don't have triggers, habits don't exist. So if you can reduce that trigger, reduce the discomfort, if you can get rid of that feeling or the thing that you're trying to avoid, then the habit of picking up your phone and just mindlessly scrolling won't be there. And that's why it's powerful to try to change our habits this way rather than resisting, like getting the urge and going, I'm not going to pick up my phone. I will not scroll. Like, it doesn't work. Our brain just doesn't like that at all. Actually, saying to our brain, you're not going to do that makes your brain want to do it even more. And then we start negotiating with ourselves. We're like, I'll just do it for a little bit. I'll just do it for a minute. I didn't do it earlier, so I
It's
can
like
do it
you're in
now.
my head.
I know. My head's the same. Don't worry. Yeah. So it's if you can change the trigger, it's incredible. It's so powerful what happens next. And that is the habit isn't there anymore.
So then that's in both directions, right? You're creating a habit. You have to create a trigger that's going to remind you that it's time to do the thing. And
Mhm.
if you are trying to stop a habit, then you have to identify the trigger that causes you to do the thing. And then you somehow erase the trigger. Either you sit with it so that it no longer has power over you, or you somehow erase it from your day to begin with, right? Like if
That's
it
right.
can be somehow eliminated completely, no
Yeah.
trigger, no
No
habit.
trigger equals no habit. And sometimes we can't remove the triggers. For some people, the trigger to scrolling on their phone is waking up first thing in the morning. We can't not wake up first thing in the morning. And so in that case, what you want to do is rather than trying to remove the trigger, it's actually replacing your unwanted habit with something else. So you might say, when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to, and then you insert new habit. It could be, I'm going to do 5 deep breaths. I'm going to take 5 deep breaths. And at the same time, you don't want to have your phone around you. There's no point saying, I'm not going to pick up my phone if your phone is there. So have it somewhere where it's out of reach, and it'll be uncomfortable the first few days. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You'll want to reach for it, but you remind yourself why you don't want to pick up your phone. What's your value around that? Why is it important for you to not pick up your phone? Do your deep breaths, and eventually that will be your new habit. And picking up your phone will feel foreign. It'll feel weird. You won't want to do it anymore. And it's just practice. It's all about consistency.
And buy an alarm clock.
Buy an alarm clock.
Before phones, we used to have alarm clocks.
This is
Buy
true.
one with those red digital lights. They're still out there. You can still get them. Stop making
Or
excuses.
here's
That was
another
really
hack though with that, because it's funny. One of the 5 top, like the top reported unwanted habits, there's sort of 5 of them. And one of them is snoozing the alarm in the morning. And so I always say to people, why do you have your alarm within reach? Like put it somewhere where when that alarm goes off, you have to physically get up to turn it off. Then you're not going to be snoozing anymore because now you're out of bed.
great idea. Great idea. But I can imagine some people doing that and then keeping it there, and some people just being like, screw it. I'm just not going to. This isn't working for me. I'm putting it back where it was. Like, what do you end up coaching people in a situation like that where they're really,
Yeah.
resisting that?
I think that's where I would use motivational interviewing. I would talk to them
Okay.
about why is it important for them to not snooze the alarm? What will life look like if they continue to snooze for the next 5 years, 10 years? Maybe the goal isn't that important for them, in which case I'd be like, well, stop trying. Stop trying to not snooze your alarm. It's fine.
Yeah.
That's what you want to
Not the
do.
hill to die on. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think the people who are motivated enough to truly want to make a change, the people that know that this change is really going to benefit their life, always want to make the change. They just need support in how to get there.
So is motivational interviewing the key to switching a motivation from extrinsic to intrinsic? Is that like you're basically convincing them to take some like outside goal and making it and internalizing it?
Yeah, I mean, motivational interviewing is a tool that we can use to help someone find their intrinsic motivation. It's not the only way, and it's not necessarily the answer, but it's an awesome evidence-based, really well-researched tool that is certainly quite effective. But it can be as simple as, why does this matter to you? Why do you want to do this? Like, what will it mean for you if you achieve this? What will life look like? Let's visualize what that will look like if you stop snoozing your alarm and you've got more time in the morning, and now you've got more time to move your body and make a healthy breakfast, and the cascade from that. What will that look like for you? And that conversation can be enough for somebody. It doesn't have to be the full motivational interviewing, brief. It can just be them identifying their own value system.
This is the end of part 1 of 2 with Dr. Gina Cleo. Part 2 coming out soon. Thanks for listening. So please share it or like it or comment on a social media post or write us a 5-star review. Thank us again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.